This is Isaac Steincamp, and I'm back from the Emporia Open here on the Chess Summit Network, and I decided with my video today, rather than talk about positional ideas, move into a little bit different direction. Tactical chess, strategic ideas. How do you win playing aggressively? So with today's game, I decided to take this critical position from my first round of the Emporia Open. I'm playing black against a lower rated opponent in the first round, and we've reached a Yugoslav-like pawn structure. You can tell that white has a distinct pawn chain here, whereas I have the traditional kingside fianchetto Sicilian dragon setup. And already off the bat, you might notice that white does have more pieces developed. He's got two bishops, two knights, a bishop, a queen, and a rook, whereas I only have a bishop, a knight, and a queen, and my king's not quite safe yet. And so in this position, I felt like was the first real starting point for how to play more aggressively. I feel like a lot of players here just castle blindly. Not that castling is a bad move, it's perfectly fine. But if I let white activate his pieces without forcing and aggressive moves to kind of dictate how he plays, then I might fall behind more quickly than I would like. So in the game, I found bishop to e6, and I felt like this was a critical first step. First of all, it covers this d5 square, which white may or may not find important, but secondly, it attacks a2. So this is the best square for this bishop in this position, and by attacking a2, I force my opponent to respond. Usually white spends a tempo playing like king b1, maybe in this kind of a position. This knight doesn't belong here, so knight c1 followed by knight b3 is perfectly fine. Any of these ideas are good, but my opponent here made a defect in his pawn structure, a2 to a3. Why is this not good? Well, this is a hook of sorts. I can try to push this b pawn up to b4, and I can put a lot of uninvited pressure here on this pawn. And the other idea that I already have, because it's half open file here, is I can get my rook onto c8, and I can put pressure this way. And so I couldn't find anything immediately appealing with this b5, b4 idea, so I kept that in my back pocket. And rather than castling, again, I neglected king safety because my opponent can't get to my king. His pieces are inactive. So I made active moves instead. Rook c8, control the c-file. If I can control the c-file, maybe play knight d7, bishop takes c3 is a real possibility because then b takes c3, rook takes c3, and I'm up a pawn, and my opponent has a horrible queenside pawn structure, and I'm perfectly okay with my position. So after rook c8, my opponent reacted to this quite awkwardly. He played knight b4. Perhaps the idea of relocating to d5 at the right moment, but I thought maybe here bishop h6 now might have been more normal. If you can eliminate these dark squared bishops, then I don't have as much pressure here on this diagonal, and I think white's a little bit more comfortable. But after knight b4, I couldn't really find any cool ideas with these pawn pushes. The knight on b4 does a good job of stopping my pawn on the b file from going too far up, and I have to move my queen from this square to move the a pawn. Both of those ideas, by the way, take a lot of time. The other issue I have is if I play knight d7, my opponent might have knight on b to d5, controlling the center, and then if bishop takes d5, knight takes d5, then my queen's under attack, and now I'm playing passively. I don't want to be playing passively if I'm more active right now, right? And so I looked at the position. There's no simple way to continue my attack. So why try to make things complicated? I'm definitely winning right now. And so I looked at all my pieces. The only piece really not doing anything right now is this rook. So I developed it, and I developed it by castling. So I found this kind of funny because usually people castle to keep their king safe. I was castling to develop my rook. I'm not worried about these h4, g4, h5 ideas in the Yugoslav because after h4, and I can play h5. And then if my opponent tries g4 and then g takes h5, I have two protectors of the h5 square. White has no way of really breaking through, and so I'm perfectly happy with my position. So my opponent plays a natural bishop to h6. But this is a critical point in the game and probably the most instructive point that I want to make today, which is how to play this kind of position. So I want you to pause your video and try to figure out, how does black show that he's better in this position? How does black take advantage of the fact that his pieces are more active squares? So pause your videos and try to think for a little bit, how can I make my position better? Okay, well, if you haven't figured it out yet, you may notice that I have a lot of pressure right now on the queen side. My two bishops are doing a good job of controlling these two diagonals. My queen's on a good side of the board. My rook's on a half open file. But there's no real breakthrough, right? So the first idea you may have looked at, which I also looked at too, by the way, was bishop takes h6, forcing the queen to come away from the queen side. But there's really no follow-up here. I looked at ideas like rook takes c3, b takes c3, queen takes a3, and this does look appealing, especially if he plays king b1. But white does have king d2, and since this is an escape square, if he can move his way over towards f2, I think these rooks become more and more meaningful as long as his king is safe. So I wasn't really happy with that option. So this made me realize, okay, well, the queen here from d2 is actually doing a really important job for me, which is stopping this king from getting to safety. So I thought a little bit for this position. I thought about maybe like knight d7 with the idea of going to c5, like a traditional accelerated dragon. But after knight d7, white might have bishop takes, king takes, and then queen d4 check. And now it's white who's active, and I'm kind of like in this limbo position where I'm no longer winning. And so, I thought about the position, and I realized the pawn structure is, for the most part, a Yugoslav pawn structure. So what are some traditional Yugoslav ideas? Even if the position isn't the same, if I can still implement the same tactical ideas, then they're probably equally as strong, especially if I can do them on the queen side, because this a3 pawn is a big weakness. And that's why I found rook takes c3. Obviously, if queen takes rook, I have bishop takes bishop check, king b1, king b1, and then rook c8 because of the bishop protecting it, and now all of my pieces are in really aggressive squares. I have two minor pieces for the rook, and there's really only one half-open file that white can really put a rook on, but it doesn't even do that much because it's not a backwards pawn. And so arguably, any one of my minor pieces is more valuable than one of my opponent's rooks. So I was really happy with this position. The other option, which is less appealing, is b takes c3. Here I have queen takes a3 check, and now because the king can't go into d2 like in the variation before, king b1, and I have this nifty idea of a5, because now if bishop takes bishop, king takes bishop, and then white moves the knight, I have this fun bishop a2 check, king a1, bishop b3 check, king b1, queen a2 check, king c1, queen a1 checkmate. And so white can't really open up the queen side any more than he already has. My opponent realized this in the game and found the only move that I thought was playable, which was bishop takes g7. And it made me think here for a while, because if I play king takes g7, now queen takes c3, and I don't have the advantage of having taken this bishop on h6, so I only have a minor piece for the rook. And my rook is kind of inactive, and while my minor pieces might be better than a rook now, it's much easier for this f4, f5 pawn break to happen, or this h4, h5 ideas to happen, like a traditional Yugoslav. And so I'm not quite as clear in this position. So I obviously can't take the bishop, but what else can I do? I need to look for forcing moves. And so I look to the queen side, right? How do I make forcing moves on the queen side? And probably one of the easiest things you can do is threaten checkmate. Unbelievable, right? Rook takes a3. Exclam, threatening rook a1 checkmate. Now, obviously if white takes the rook, mate in 1, but if white tries to block this idea with knight to a2, in this position I have king takes g7 after queen takes queen, rook takes queen, and I'm up a full minor piece. Remember, I have this rook on f8, and if pawn takes rook, then I have queen takes pawn, king b1, bishop takes a2, king a1, and this is the same exact idea as before. Checkmate. And so knight a2 doesn't work. And, how else is he going to stop checkmate? Well, my opponent thought for a while, and the only move he could come up with was b takes a3, and I think that's probably the only move in this position. I replied queen takes a3 check. My opponent played king b1. And here there is no obvious move. And when there's no obvious move, you have to understand that it's okay to take a move to improve your position. Not every move has to be forcing. So here I just played king takes g7, just grab the material. So right now, if you count up the pawns, I'm 2 pawns ahead, and I have an extra minor piece for a rook. So already I'm materially even, because 3 plus 2 is 5, and 5 is 5. So 5 equals 5. And so I know materially I'm fine, but I definitely have a lot more initiative here than any other variation that I had considered as black. My opponent here played c3. which I thought was an interesting move. So I played a5 here to attack the knight, and my opponent blundered immediately with knight d5 because knight d5 loses to knight takes knight, pawn takes, and then bishop check, winning, right? But the key thing here to notice is that it's not like any other move was better. Knight d3 or knight c2 can run into ideas like rook c8 and put pressure here. Knight c2 also blocks the queen from covering a2, so you can tell even in this position white's few pieces aren't exactly coordinated, and that's why strategic ideas like the ones in the Sicilian Dragon are so important to understand, is that especially when white makes weaknesses over here on the queen side, these rook takes knight ideas are very strong. Thank you for watching this video. This is Steincamp signing off. Until next time, bye-bye.